So firstly, my presentation is quite image-based, as you can see. So I'm really going against the typography there with all my images. And secondly, I was wondering if, I know it's pre-lunch, but if you could all look really excited, I'd love to take a photo. I am a millennial, I want to put it on my Instagram, and I want to show my bosses back at home that I am actually doing some work, because I think they think I'm having way too much fun out here. So I'm going to take a quick photo now. My presentation is very much about the teaching of experimental typography and also kind of wider graphic design in a sense. So I teach at the University of Brighton in the UK. I'm a senior lecturer and course leader of the graphic design course there. The course is really innovative and it has a reputation for producing kind of ambitious, bold designers with really different skill sets who communicate, inform, entertain, and challenge the status quo of what's around at the moment. So we have a range of traditional workshop spaces, but also we run a lot of kind of day workshops where we kind of, as like catalysts to allow students to try different things out, different techniques, and then they decide where they want to go from there. So some of them take it on and explore a certain technique, and others will maybe prefer something else. So some people might be more analog, some people might be more digital, and we kind of encourage people to find their own way, which is actually really well explained here by one of our graduate students that came back this year, Rivka, who is actually now a creative coder. So she said this, which is the fact that the course is so open to pursuing your own interests and choosing what you want to learn means that collectively we have a really diverse skill set. The diversity of our different practices means that we have always been a really collaborative course rather than a competitive one. So the way that we tend to work is we really encourage collaboration. So moving on to my presentation, I wrote this paper with my colleague Gavin Ambrose, who sadly can't be here today, and sadly I haven't managed to record him, which is a shame. I'm sure he would have been embarrassed by that. So this paper looks at the teaching of typography, and it looks at and the way the paper's written, it talks about the development of graphic design theory and an understanding of history and how that makes actually how you learn as students. It gives you a joined up practice, so you understand that theory, that practice, and we try and teach it together. It's important as learners that you respect the values of typographic history and the many canons of thought that have been developed around the discipline. But however, we would also argue that it's important to embrace a more speculative approach, kind of looking to the future and thinking about where that can take you. And we think this should be at the forefront of design education as we kind of develop future curriculums and actually try and push the boundaries of creativity. So it's not just linked to technology, but it's also linked to cultural movements in society. And bear with me while I now go and explain typography and experimentation, because I know you've probably had that a lot of times already. But it's important to how we started thinking about this work. So we again looked up the basic definitions by doing an online search of typography, which came up with the fact that it's the art and technique of arranging type to make written language legible, readable, and appealing when displayed. And experimentation being a new invention or product based on untested ideas or techniques and not yet established or finalized. So when we looked at those, we thought they're actually two quite separate things. Experimentation is very, very creative. It's pushing boundaries. And actually, the way typography is explained is kind of it's seen as needing to be, or it has been in the past, seen as needing to be legible, readable, displayed well. So they're actually of quite a binary position. They're split. They're quite hard to learn if you don't have any understanding of where that comes from. So it's not a harmonious relationship. So how do we help you as students understand that kind of position? So that's where the history and context comes in. And we think it's really important that you learn that. So going back to typography and its kind of those definitions, that it's legible, readable, and appealing when displayed, that links to the modernist movement, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. And the idea that form follows function, and therefore you should be able to kind of understand what's displayed through type. So this is explained by designers. This is shown by modernist designers such as these ones here. So this is just a quick flick through of some visuals for you. So Max Bill, Joseph Müller-Brockmann, Lezo Moholy-Nagy, and Herbert Bayer, as you saw earlier. And modernist ideals obviously linked to both design, wider thought, wider philosophy. So modernist ideals were a commitment against greed, commercialization, exploitation and cheapness, rational principles, a preference for sans serif over serif, dislike of decoration, which is what came before, a preference for asymmetrical layouts and grids over traditional centered arrangements, use of negative or white space, a preference for the industrial over the handmade. And then experimental, that we've sort of decided that actually links to postmodernism, as well as being everyone talking about technology developing, and that being the thing that's happening now. That's been happening since, we went from writing in calligraphy to kind of then having letterpress to, every printing technology that has developed. So lithography, digital printing, 3D printing. When you think about that, actually enabling experimentation. It's enabling that kind of, through that postmodernist era, it's enabling that to happen, and it was pushing and challenging what came before. So postmodernism was very much about a distrust of theories, so it was a reaction to modernism. Sorry if I'm going over old ground, I'm sure lots of you know this already, but it will become clear in a minute why I'm saying all this. A questioning of modernism, deliberately contrary to modernist theories. It was characterized by a self-conscious use of earlier styles and conventions, a mixing of different artistic styles and media. Also, type began to be used as image. It wasn't necessarily having to be primarily the readable thing anymore, whereas in modernism you see it's often very much that you can read that. When you start looking at postmodernism, which I'm going to show you now, you'll see that it starts getting broken down, abstracted, and used as kind of different levels. So maybe the imagery is first, the text is second. So this is Wolfgang Weinhardt, father of postmodern typography, some might call him. Soon after modernism, he started breaking down letter forms. This is postmodern designers, so this is Fuse magazine, which was created in the early 90s by Neville Brody and John Wozencroft, who looked at typographic legibility and experimentation, and that's actually been, that's a thing that's been ongoing, and it's a tension that's continued throughout time. Should it be legible, should it not? And when this came out, it was really contentious within design theory as to what they were doing, because it was very much questioning, did a typeface need to be legible? Here's another one. And this is the sketches for one of the designs that was in Fuse magazine by Darren Scott. But as you can see, no matter how illegible you might see it, or legible or illegible it might be, it still takes rigor and kind of that modernist theory of and kind of restrictions to actually develop a working font. Even if it's less legible and it's more of a display font, it still takes that rigor, even if it's really experimental. So that shows those two ends of the spectrum. And this is an iconic postmodernist poster by Catherine McCoy from Cranberry Academy of Arts. So postmodernism enabled the viewer to not only see images and read text, but to see text and read images. So that's what I was talking about earlier. It flips that idea of the modernist idea of form following function and the hierarchy of text and image. So to make it clearer, you can see it there. That's the diagram that I've kind of taken from it. So the fact that you can actually see images, but you can also see text, you don't have to read. It doesn't have to always be readable, and images can be seen and they can also be read. So the use of text as both readable and as image making is shown best through the work of British graphic designer Chris Ashworth. He appropriately describes his work as Swiss grit, so that idea of linking modernism and Swiss typography with the grit kind of postmodernism. He is editor of Ray Gun magazine from 1997, And he kind of worked at the end of the postmodern era. So here you start to see that idea of the combination of text and image coming in. This image particularly, very much, you read them on the same level. So the text, even though you can read the text, I wouldn't say you go straight to the text and read that first. So that brings us to where are we now? So if modernism is way in the past and postmodernism is kind of behind us, what is the current zeitgeist? What are we doing? That's what I want you to consider, basically. And I'm just going to show a few examples of things that are happening now that maybe start to think about that, but also I think the people we've seen here in this conference are really pushing boundaries, and I think that's really inspiring. I've certainly gone away with a lot of ideas, and I'm sure you will as well. So David Wolsk, he actually uses letterpress, so very traditional modernist layout, but he challenges and pushes boundaries of traditional modernist technologies. So he's using letterpress, but he's also kind of using these different skills he's learned from different places and bringing them in and breaking down how that works and how that looks and abstracting forms. And this is a design by A2 Type. So they were looking at printing processes, and they used a 3D printer and letterpress. So they're using one of the oldest forms of printing and then one of the newest forms of printing to put that together and print a new typeface through the letterpress process. I'm not going to show you the video, but there's an amazing video. It's 10 minutes long, so we don't have time for that. And it explains why they've done this. So actually the letterpress studio got in contact with them. They're a really progressive typography foundry, and they worked together to print this beautiful typeface and have a modern letterpress typeface. There it is in their drawers. This is based in London. And then, obviously, as well as this, there's designers that are constantly pushing themselves to develop typography using new tech, moving image, creative coding, virtual reality, integrated design, and it's constantly and rapidly evolving. It feels like there's no way we can keep up. You can't do it all. Like, no one can do it all. So that's why, I was saying we teach to allow people to kind of find a moment they really enjoy and go from there, because no one's going to learn it all. But this design is by Spin Studio, and they've kind of used the idea of using hand-rendered ink play, but then also motion design. I just thought I'd show you a few of these just to see. So this is a moving poster experiment by Studio Dunbar, who do a lot of moving type as well. And then this is something that I just, being my age, I just found on Instagram, and I just thought it was really nice, so I thought I'd share it with you. It's creative coding and an interaction piece made by Ki Jun Woo, and I just thought it was really interesting and beautiful. But obviously, these are interesting. But it's important to understand, it's important to maybe have something in the back of your mind as to why are you doing this? Why would you make something that's beautiful or pushing boundaries of technology? So that's what we really want to kind of start to engage our students with when they're working on different projects. So this leads us on to speculative theories. So where are we going, and how do we teach experimental typography? How do we make it challenging and engaging to you as designers now? And also the idea of serious play. Does anyone know who Paula Scher is? Yeah? Good. So actually being informed, but still being playful, still allowing yourself, as Ricky said earlier, to be playful, not to feel bogged down in theory, but to actually just have a bit of understanding of things so that you can play in an informed way. So we're no longer postmodernists. So I began to look around at different theories of where we are now, these kind of speculative theories of how we are as cultures and in design and in creativity, kind of more broadly than in typography or just graphic design. So I found one of the theories is called Metamodernism, which is part of my paper that we wrote. And Metamodernism is the idea that the world we live in now, it oscillates between modernism and postmodernism. So it oscillates and rotates between a modern enthusiasm and a postmodern irony, between hope and melancholy, between naivety and knowingness, empathy and apathy, unity and plurality, totality and fragmentation, purity and ambiguity, and I kind of added to that, which you'll see in a minute, legibility and illegibility. So actually, I think it's important that you realize as well, and I'm sure you do, that it doesn't just relate to design or creativity, it relates to like how we as people are engaging with the world. So to get a bit personal here, I thought I'd show you some things. So, questions that you might ask yourself on a day-to-day basis about what you're going to do with your creative life. Should I have a baby? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I want to concentrate on my career. Or should I just get a dog, because that might be nicer and really easy? Should I go traveling, because, but actually I can't probably afford to, but there's so many options out there. Technology allows us to see so much. Or should I focus on my career? Should that be my thing? And there's so many options that actually the kind of metamodernist idea, proposal is that actually we're never going to be able to pick one. We can't have that modernist ideal anymore. So, yeah, we'll never have the answers. As the world moves faster and faster, we switch between having enthusiasm and ambivalence, between modernism and postmodernism. There's endless possibilities. And to create future-focused, innovative designers, you need to understand theory, history, question where you are, and experiment seriously. Think and make. So this leads me on to a case study I recently did with my students before I came out here. So unfortunately, I didn't have time to do a workshop here, but I'd love to in future. So I basically gave them a slightly different version of this presentation, taught them through these ideas, and then we just had a 3-hour workshop that was just creative play, really, but with this in the back of their minds. So they had things to think about when they were making. So we started the workshop by just using traditional collage, calligraphy, mark-making techniques. It was about play. It was a series of quick creative exercises, the legibility of a letter form. By the end of the workshop, this is what I presented them, by the end of the workshop you'll have created multiple versions of one letter form, oscillating between two poles. So legibility and illegibility, purity and ambiguity, totality and fragmentation. So it was very much a playful workshop, but it was really interesting because they all came back to me and said, there was so much to think about, and a lot of them came back and said, my project is about this sort of thing, I need to know more, can you send me that paper you've read, can you do this? So it was a really positive experience. So I just thought I'd show you some pictures of the workshop. We basically just started, it was very quickly done, so we started with Helvetica, gave everyone a letter, and they went from there. So within the workshop, we were making, painting, cutting things out, collaging, looking at the different levels. How do you represent a letter? Does it need to be legible? Does it not? And actually representing that theory through just one typeface. So these are just some images of the work in process. You can see my trainers in that picture. And these were some of the kind of outcomes from the end of the workshop, which then went on into something else. I'm not sure what that one on the left is. It could be a U, but it could be something else. It's very beautiful. This is an I done by Ben. These ones are done by Hannah, V and C, an O and a T. So then when we finished the workshop, at the end, I briefed all the students to come back with something that moved, and it showed that variation. So the idea that something could be legible or illegible. So then I was just going to show you a few of the moving images. It's a very simple idea, and it's definitely not something that's finished. And I think actually what me and Gavin have come up with from this is that we really want to write more speculative kind of design workshops focused around different theories, not necessarily just this idea of metamodernism, but looking at other areas. So looking at sociology, anthropology, design theory, and actually just, asking people questions that they can think about and then make. So these are some of the pieces that my students made. Oh, there you go. Press one button and not the other again. It's very simple. Interestingly, these start to look like other letter forms that obviously I've seen here, and I'm thinking, oh, it could definitely move between different languages with these. And actually, I ran this with one of my students because she's looking at illegible and legible type. So it was a third-year student and myself who ran it together, which was a really nice process and definitely something I'd like to continue when it's relevant. An O. This is my one that I did in the workshop. So as I said before, this is kind of just the start and definitely something that we want to take on further. But to sum up what I've just said, the contrast of rigor and tradition combined with challenging experimentation related to technological advance is the aim of contemporary design. And taking a wider look at movements of society directly links and contextualizes typography and graphic design education. So experimentation continually swinging between two poles, the stationary modernist past, the rigor, and the other immovable, exploring, evolving future, experimentation is extremely important. So we need to teach theory, historical and speculative, alongside practical application to allow students to engage, question, and challenge the current status quo, which is, if you remember at the beginning, that was kind of like part of our little blurb about my uni, so it ties in nicely. And typographic practice is just that, it's a practice, but it isn't independent. It is part of a wider range of cultural practices that constitute culture and in turn shape society. So it both drives and is reflective of the desires of a given moment in time. And that moment for you is now, so it's thinking about now and what that moment means and how you can push that on. The future of typographic development lies in this intersection, the ordered and disordered, offering both communication and personal expression. Okay, thank you very much.